Hey everybody, how's it going? Just here chilling on another Sunday, April the 13th, uh, catching up with current events and taking a look at things that are going on in the world today. And I kind of just want to give my spiel on it. I want to know, I can't really call it a spiel. And I'm just doing this on first take just to keep it as real as possible. But I really want to look at it from a perspective of, okay, now that we have um, so many now that we have so many different opinions about actions that are be taking place, you know, there's an air of uncertainty, and I kind of just want to look at it from a perspective of what could we imagine, what kind of economy would we want do we want to imagine for the American people that would incentivize progress here in America and could potentially be a model for the rest of the world. And so, what I want to do is I want to take a period of time and just explore our current tax system and why it's there and how it should potentially function, right? And really, the idea is just to toss out ideas here and there, left and right, to see um, what people's thoughts are. Could this be uh, a potentially economic boosting tax system that'll actually function for both people who live here and people who come here. And so that's what I just want to do. I just want to talk about it. So here's what I think. So I think the best way to take a look at the current tax situation, and I'm not too familiar with the tax codes. I do know that it's not it's not very balanced. Um, And so this would be my best idea of balancing or rebalancing the economic system or the tax system. Because I think we fundamentally understand that the government needs taxes to function. I mean, that's how we pay for our government fees, that's how we pay for our individual governments and whatever excess we pay for that goes to the federal government or we could just send it to the federal government and they distribute the funds according to whatever rules. There's different ways you can do it. But that's not what I'm focused on right now. The point is the government is run on taxes, and the taxes are paid by the citizens. So if you're a citizen of the United States, your taxes that you pay should run for the government. Now, I think we all know that the government, and not just the government, but like the environment around us evolved. And as the environment around us evolved, we tend to evolve with it. But some systems that we have in place doesn't quite evolve nearly as fast. And then you always have, you have the general generational back and forth between primitive technology versus newer advanced technology and things like that. And so now we're at a situation where our government is 50 years behind our current technological process, or maybe even more than that. So there's a giant upset um, because basically what we've realized is the our government system is running off of Windows XP base Windows 95 operating systems when we're using like the latest Apple OS and uh, Windows 11 and things like that. Um, but in reality, it's basically we've neglected our very interior. We've neglected our own intellectual systems, and so we need to get on that. So I want to propose an idea, and so this idea is primarily related to taxes. Um, Now, I don't now, let me be clear. I don't know if we're actually running on Windows XP systems or 95 systems. I'm making that joke because I do know that there are like this is public knowledge and this is public information that there are companies with s- some systems that are like outdated, and so they have to get theirs fixed. Um, I don't know what those companies are, but I do know that there were companies that exist because this was a common talking point. Um, or a common thing to know in like most tech circles. But regardless, um, the point is the systems are old and they have to be updated. And that's the point I want to make. So here's my proposal for a new tax system that could benefit everyone greatly. And I haven't really gone deep into the thought experiment because I was actually thinking about it uh, earlier, shortly before I began recording this. I was like, wait a second, this is actually something I could probably record and maybe get out there and maybe get people to think about this. But here's the idea, right? Our government essentially runs off of businesses, right? It runs off entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs help distribute the wealth that we as a total nation generate to help fund different parts of our nation that needs that funding. So like government spending, national defense, border security, all those things like protection, American protection rights, all those things, right? So entrepreneurs are essentially the active working entrepreneurs are essentially the elite of the working class, right? So this is about, are you actively are you actively contributing to your community? Do you have that sense of active contribution to your community? And so what ends up happening is when you get into when you want to recover that economic boom, you have to inspire people to want to work again. You want to get people to work, and you want to actually reap the benefits of work. So how does that work exactly? So here's what I would propose as a tax system. Okay. Um, the amount of income that you would make would be proportional to two things. One, the amount of years that you put into it, aka raises, right, in the short term, and then B, um, the amount of work that you've done, right? So there'll be an additional bonus on top of that. So you have your basic hourly wage, which basically is your basic contributions um, to the working. And this is how you would calculate like income and taxes and stuff, so and the things you would consider when you're looking at taxing people, right? So the number of years, so your what I'm describing is the how to determine the amount of tax and the because what I would argue is anyone who's making less than, at bare minimum, anyone who's making less than $100,000 a year should not pay any taxes. Point blank. The reason why is because it's fundamentally unfair due to rent prices and things like that. When you to keep to have people who make less than that, or even if you want to do like this, people who make less than the average 5 year cost of 5 times less than the average yearly cost of the standard of living in a particular city. So let's say the standard of living for a particular city is maybe like, I don't know, 60,000 a year. If someone isn't making $300,000 a year, they shouldn't be taxed. So there's different factors that the taxes should be based off of. And this would be practical in the sense where if you want to make the tax if you want to make taxes worth your money, you have to base it on premises that actually make sense. So the idea is, if we're a meritocracy, basically the more you work, the more you earn, the more you should be rewarded. Okay, so what I would do is I would first of all give everyone a bonus for working in the first place, right? You want people to be able to have enough income to afford to pay for their food, to pay for their housing, to pay for utilities. And you also have to take a look at how the utilities markets are set up, and you have to take a look at how the housing markets are set up, and you have to take a look at how the food production markets are set up. And you start to see how all these markets start to intertwine between each other. Um, So like with taxes, there should be a base minimum set to where you should not have to pay any taxes, right? So $100,000 or more. Maybe it goes up, and my opinion is, and the way I would set it up is I would set it so that $100,000 or less, no taxes. Cool. That gives people who's entering into the workforce time to actually start learning how to save money. That doesn't take the money from them because it's like, well, what are you going to do with it, right? And then that allows people to get on their feet. That allows people to pay for their things that they need, um, and actually allows people to have some semblance of money. Now, that $100,000 may have to go up or lower depending on how it is. Now, I would argue that the tax rate should go from the how the average standard of living income living in that boundary, that $100,000 limit or whatever that boundary is, should be set on this basic standard of living in each of the cities, and you can average that based off of what the housing market is. So as the housing market regulates and as people move around and so forth, because people are going to be incentivized to move around to different areas to meet their standards of living, right? So you'll have your lower income areas, but they won't be so low income that they can't take care of themselves, right? And you also have the option to go back to live in those areas, and we'll talk more about that in later once you start getting into the higher income levels. So basically everyone has a basic standard of living that they're allowed to have, and essentially that's based off of where they live, what type of work that they do, are they giving back to community, and that's essentially going to be an influencing factor in the determination of the tax code or the value of the tax. um so you begin with this limit that's based off of the average housing, and it's going to be based off average housing costs, um average rent housing, average utilities, and then average like groceries, like the very basic things that you need in order to function and to get to work, right? And so so then you have this setup. So then after $100,000, that's when you start paying taxes to the government. So people who can't even afford to live, so basically people who can't even afford to take care of themselves should not be contributing to anything in any way. And that also includes the government because they have to be able to take care of themselves first, right? They have to be able to live comfortably in their own houses. And the way you determine that is based off of how much spending they do. So right now, I think the tax income bracket is just based off of how much money you earn. But let's be real, you earn money based off of your work or for your work, but you also spend. And the thing about it is, as Americans, we already spend a lot, and we spend a lot with the taxes we currently have. So imagine how much spending is going to go on and we don't have any taxes. Like, right? Like we are a very consumptionist nature, and has to kind of our taxes will reflect that, but we can't but they kind of have to do it in a way that makes sense, right? So we want to uh make people realize, you have to spend money, right? But you have to also contribute. So when you work, you earn money, right? The money that you earn does not get taxed. Now, after you earn a certain amount of money and you're not using that money, if you're not spending it or if you're not spending it, if you're not investing it, or if you're not like donating it to people, and it's just sitting there not being used for anything purposes, that's when it gets taxed. And so the idea is you want to incentivize people to always be looking for opportunities to extend your wealth to others, and that's what the purpose of the tax should be. Now a portion of that, now that's how you get tax cuts, but you want to also make sure you incentivize this behavior so that the tax cuts make sense, and also so that the government, because ultimately what ends up happening is if all the problems with the government was resolved, and let's be realistic here, if we resolve all the issues that are in the government at this moment, the operating costs of the government would be so cheap, be so little, that like you can have the you wouldn't really have any issues going on because everyone would be in perfect harmony. And the way you do that is you want to incentivize the behavior that actually gets people to want to do that. And so you can do it through tax incentives and things like that. So after, so anything above this limit, let's say this $100,000 limit, will be basically taxed, right? Would be taxed. Now the tax would be pretty heavy, right? Let's say, and then if you say 100,000 a year, for every $100,000 bracket, you get a flat tax, and from 100,000 to 200,000 is another flat tax. And then what you can do is, instead of making it, so you can first do it with a step pattern, and then from there you can convert it to like a linear equation so that it's proportional to the amount of money that you make, which is originally how the tax code, I guess, was supposed to work, right? If you just do a flat 21%. But the idea is you need to have the idea is you can keep the whatever the percentage is, but you have to have a lower boundary to it. You have to have a new boundary. Um, I guess you have to have a lower limit to it. So you can't just put it at zero and just put flat 10% and then just take 10% from people who's barely getting any, right? Um, but you would basically bump that lower income up, that lower level up, and then have your tax go up over time. And I would say a stepped pattern, because a step pattern means that, okay, what you're doing is you're adding on another 100,000. Because here's the other thing too, right? One person with $1 million is one individual with $2 million. Two individuals, each with $1 million, is 2 million. Is two individuals, but $2 million. So what I'm trying to say is the value has doubled. So even so, the value has the value, both the value of the individual and the value of the money has just increased by a factor that it's incomparable, due to the fact that two people, if one person was able to generate an idea that was worth $1 million, and another person was also able to generate an idea that was worth $1 million, if you put those two people together, the value of that $2 million would probably, it's not even, the value of those two individuals is probably not even worth $1 million, because these two individuals can now work with each other, uh, share their thoughts and ideas, and they can probably take the $2 million as a starting point and then uh go beyond with it. So in that case, what you would do is you say, okay, for a single individual, right, you have the upper limit of, let's say, the $100,000 we talked about before, and then you have the taxes going up. But now if you have two people, instead of $100,000, that bumps up even higher. Now that for two people, it bumps up even higher. Now, what does that necessarily mean? What that basically means is, if you have two people who are um, entrepreneurs who are working on a business idea, and keep in mind, businesses are the main driver that creates jobs. And so I'm looking at this from an entrepreneur perspective. Think Acknowledging the fact that, yeah, you also going to have workers and things like that, but keep in mind, the workers have workers' rights. The workers have freedom to work in an environment, and we have the responsibility as a business owner to provide them with a work environment that is safe, that adheres to the law, um, and we have to make sure that we are responsible as a business to make sure that we don't have any type of corruption or any type of nefarious behaviors running throughout business. So there is a part of integrity that is required in order to run the business, in order for it to be as successful and profitable as it is. And there's also a measure of integrity that needs to be maintained within the governmental structure, so that the business model can take a, excuse me, can take a stance from that. So think of it this way. If you want to think of how the federal government is, essentially the federal government is the biggest business. Federal government oversees the nation, and the biggest business system, so to speak, that basically coordinates, is the grand coordinator of all the smaller businesses. So, and it functions based also of the profits of both the businesses, the business owners, the individuals, and all the individuals that work in the business. But in order for the federal government to succeed and also to make sure it's coordinated effectively, you also have to take a look at the fact that you have to take a look at the fact that every individual in a nation has a potential to contribute to the government. And so you want every individual to maximize their potential, because not only does it help benefit them, it benefits others, it benefits their families, it benefits their communities, it benefits the environment, it benefits everything as a whole. And so you want to make sure you have a system that's set in place that encourages that without it being intrusive, right? It's basically incentive. It's incentive towards good behavior. Um, okay, so let's go back to tax code because I'm. This is the beauty of thought of like just thinking out loud. Is you're allowed to just go to different places, but it's interesting to see how it works. Um, so you start from zero to $100,000 a year, then from $100,000 to $200,000. So my thing is your tax. So right now the current tax system is single, married, filed jointly, married, filed separately, and then head of household, I believe. So basically you're single or you're married, right? Um, so if you're single or you're married, your tax code would differ basically. So like if you're single, $100,000 your limit. Anything above $100,000 is basically just going to be is going to be taxed heavily unless unless you actually have expenditures that's related to anything above that $100,000 limit that's being used to contribute to a business, right? That's being used to contribute to a business. And when you run a business, there's going to be a separate tax code for that because you want to make sure that that business is running properly, is actually contributing, is making profits, is actually functioning as business, and it's not just like sitting there as a potential money box, right? Oh, I can avoid paying taxes if I funnel into a business that's just sitting there doing nothing. Like, no, we don't want that either, right? Either you spend your money, you give your money, you save your money, or you invest your money, you put in like a retirement account, things like that. Like, make sure you're doing something with your money other than it's just sitting in the bank account being useless, right? Because on one hand, you don't want to sit in the bank account being useless, but also you also don't want to be sitting there broke with constant debt, right? And so it's like it's really difficult because now you're training it's difficult because now you're disciplining stuff to that behavior. But the thing is, if that behavior is the behavior that rewards the most success, that should be implemented as a system, and the system should be rewarding on that, and it shouldn't. Now the now you do, and the system, and the cool thing about that type of system is that it's self-punishing in its own way, because if you don't do that, even if you decide not to play by the rules, if you don't play by the rules to one extreme, you end up hurting yourself by going into extreme debt. But if you also end up not playing by the rules the other way, and you just continue to save all your money, well, you won't reap the benefits as much as you would as if you did contribute. So that would be the coolest part, and the best part is having that system that incentivizes this good behavior and makes it much more rewarding in the long term. So, with that being said, now that we solved the lower end, now we have people who's making more than $100,000. Okay, anything above that $100,000 should be taxed in a percent on a curve. So the more you make based off the $100,000, the more you contribute, and it should just be a flat linear rate, nothing crazy. Um, Flat linear rate. And the way that it works is if you take any of that money, if you take that money, so in the way that tax works, I should say, it should be pretty severe the higher you go. So it would be like 1%. It would be like essentially 1% for every um I would say probably 1% for every 1,000 above 100,000. So 1% part so well, actually, hold on, that might be a little too much. Basically, the idea is you should be paying proportional to your rates. Like if you're making, let's say if you make $1 million a year versus $10 million a year versus $50 million a year versus $1 billion a year. Like if you're making $1 billion a year, you should be able to contribute at least half, at least more than 75 to 85% of that to the economies and capacity, because that's so much that can be used, not just to pay to help. Like we're thinking of taking the money from the rich and giving it to the poor. Why not incentivize the rich to give to the poor and help the poor while simultaneously helping the poor, uh, you know, while simultaneously helping the poor get to their feet by not taxing them. Like we can tackle both at the same time and make it beneficial for everyone. So that's how the tax code will work. So it will be proportional as you get up to higher ranks. And then so like when you're making $1 billion, you should be like $1 billion a year. You should be contributing at least like 950 million in that. Because again, after a certain point, there's an upper limit to what a single person can spend in a year. Now again, that proportion, again, that rate of proportion is going to be in relation to the amount of contributions that they're expected to contribute. So if you're a billionaire, you're expected to contribute investments in smaller communities as well as larger investments, right? So you're not just using it, you're just not like, buying up real estate and keeping it for yourself and it's just sitting there accumulating, and accruing interest. Well, not accruing interest, but appreciating in value. Um, and just but also not doing anything with it, right? So you want to try to get rid of that idea. Um, So if they take their dollars and they spend it, they give it to, they don't have to necessarily give it in a sense where they have to donate it, but they can also like write out grants and go to go to cities, go to smaller like inner cities, and go to places and be like, hey, okay, all right, your septic system has been underwater for 30 years and the buildings are dilapidated. Let's do new construction. Let's do new construction. Let's tear down these old buildings. Let's pay for hotels for the people who lived in these old buildings, help them move out to places so that they can actually have an apartment building that's actually, you know, like if they have the money and they have the income to fund these sorts of projects, they should be doing that. And idea is we should have a tax system that rewards them doing that. Because if we do that, I believe we will see a lot of progress happening. Because now, because okay, so let's do it this way. 50% tax, right? Anything over $500,000 a year, 50% tax. Let's just throw a theoretical. Anything over $500,000, 50% tax. 50% of tax, all your income above $500,000. So basically, if you don't spend any of your money, you get half of your money taken away. Or actually, you know what? 75% tax. Let's get brutal here. So you earn over $500,000, anything over $500,000, and you don't put it into an investment account, you don't invest into businesses, you don't put it into the markets, you don't actually use it to benefit, not put into the stock market. I'll get to that in a minute, because stock market I think is too complex for people, too abstract for people to get, so we're not gonna worry about that. But basically, if you're not contributing to actively to society, you get 75% of your money taken away of your whatever you make, anything above $500,000 or even $100,000. Like I said, I can't give you a number because that value is predicated primarily on the average standard of living in whatever area that person lives in, and that's going to be relative to the amount of income. So like if you're earning money and you're living in a place that you can't afford and you're living beyond your means, guess what? You're going to have to be forced to move to a place that's cheaper and that's outside of your means. So so it'll get a lot of these people who's like living affluently but not really working. They have to go back to their places where they can live within their means, right? Especially if they are not making enough to pay for their own taxes, for their own health. Like you want to give people a sense of responsibility, and it has to be reflected in how the tax code is determined. So it's really just common sense, really. Like it makes sense if you really just think about it. And so let's say anything above, let's just use $100,000. Screw it, why not, right? So as a single individual making more than $100,000 a year, okay, um, he uh he or she go earns more than $100,000 a year. Let's say $110,000 a year. Okay, well, did you spend the $10,000? That'd be the first question. Well, Maybe you did. Yes, you spent the $10,000. Okay, fine. Um, did you? And I mean, essentially, you can think of it as instead of it being an income tax, and so okay, here's an even better rate. Here's a better idea. Instead of it being an income tax, how about it be a asset tax? So again, like your wage rate doesn't really matter, right? Because you don't want to take taxes out of your wage rate, but you do want to incentivize people to. If you want to incentivize people to spend, instead of replace the income tax with the asset tax. Okay, you have any asset that's over now liquid assets, a liquid asset tax. There we go. Instead of a income tax, do a liquid asset tax. So if you have any liquid assets that's over a predetermined amount that would be set on your relative standards of living based off of where you live and things like that. Um, if you're not either spending it or investing it or have it being moved around, that would be your tax. You'd be your cutoff point. So if you have $110,000, $110,000 in your bank account, anything above $100,000, boop, that would be your tax essentially. So anything you make above that, you're either incentivized to either put it into an investment account. Now, obviously you be incentivized to either put into investments or actually like award the money out. And so the idea is for that, and why that would be better than income tax is that way you get rid of the wage taxes. That way you get rid of wage taxes completely, and you incentivize people to save, and then you incentivize people to spend, and you get more spending that's involved in the economy. And then what ends up happening is if you let's say you're a billionaire and you own a lot of assets, well, if you own a lot of assets and those assets are actually contributing, you will get a tax cut. But if you own a lot of assets and those assets are not actively contributing, you will still get penalized for that. So you want to promote good behavior while also at the same time, because like if you're just using your money to leverage debts to leverage debt, but your debt isn't actually promoting anything beneficial, then I don't think you should be having that money to do that in the first place. Like if you're not contributing, if your debt isn't meant to contribute to something that's actually benefiting the community, then I don't think you should be allowed to have that money to perform that debt in the first place, which is why it should be taxed. So again, it's a common sense principle. Um, and the idea is, okay, now I don't like the idea of the government determining what that upper limit is. So what I would say is that upper limit would be determined by the number of years that you worked, as well as the type of work that you do. And I also think that that would require higher job market rebalance, and that would also require a educational and structural rebalance. So there's a lot of potential for other things to improve just from the economic factor alone. And I might even talk about that more in future videos, depending on when I get the idea to do this. Um, but the idea is that just from an economic principle, if you base the tax code based off of the number of years, so like the more you work, the longer you work, the longer you work. So we kind of have that in the form of raises, right? You have that in the form of raises, right? You also have the type of work that you do. And so I think this is where we get misaligned with the type of work that we do versus the amount of impact that it has, importance and impact that it has on the society. And I think we should judge. I think pay rates and pay wages should be reflective of that, because right now I think there's a lot of jobs that are currently extremely undervalued in today's market, and because of potential regulations that's restricting it or other factors that I don't know at the moment, um, it's making it really hard to find skilled people to do jobs that require skilled labor. And so I think what happens is there has to be a job market restructuring. Um, so where the jobs that require a higher level of training, uh, should be reflective. Basically, if you got to go to school to train to do a specific to train to perform the requirements of a specific job, that should be reflected in that job's pay. I think there's a lot of jobs in the job market that are affected by the imbalance because there's a lot of people who are engineers today, and there are a lot of people who use their their brain, and they use tools like scientists, engineers, nurses, like healthcare, science, and technology. I'm an engineer myself, so people, mathematics, physics, all these sort of things, their pay, I believe, is not reflective of that. So I think the amount of pay you should get on average in a job market should be relative to the amount of work that you have to do in order to succeed with that. And I also think that that will actually involve that would actually make a lot of new markets competitive and viable again. So like for example, entertainment, right? Entertainment, you have uh the right, you have record labels, you have uh you have recording studios and all these sorts of things, and then you have the big conglomerate studios, right? And then you have copyright issues and all these sorts of things, and then you have monopolies and all these sorts. You have all these sorts of phenomena happening. But if the markets were truly competitive, what would really happen is you would have multiple movie studios, independent movie studios, dominating, taking over a lot of these conglomerate studios, these big name studios, AAA. Like, and we actually seeing that today, where a lot of indie games are outperforming a lot of AAA games, and it's common knowledge. And this is not even close. Um, and so what we're starting to see is independent creators, people who genuinely care about the product, care about what they want the product to achieve, is now actually starting to step beyond the scope of, I don't need a big name company to do this. I can just do this myself. And that's what we're seeing now. It's pretty cool, right? Um, and so it's funny how I started with initially talking about the tax code and then went to this sort of topic. But the idea is you want the tax code to reflect it. And again, the tax code isn't very complicated. It's just a measure of the amount of contributions that you've made to society. So, and the more that you contribute to society, the more you should retain from society. So every year, do you get a raise, and you put your raise to your so your income, basically your primary source of income would be your upper limit into the amount of money you can earn or spend and save. So as long as you make, your yearly wage, you know, and the reason why I say that your hourly wage versus like, like other situations like overtime, stuff like that, because overtime is a little bit tricky because there are some industries where overtime isn't really granted. Now, what you can do is you can make stores 24 hours again and make overtime an option, because that would be really cool to get back to overtime, is just to have 24-hour facilities. Um, Believe it or not, it is actually, if I could be wrong here, but I actually think it would be more economically efficient over time to have 24-hour facilities, because then you can have production around clock. And there used to be a time when we had 24-hour stores, uh, and you would go to the store at like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, you grab food, you know. A lot of those places has closed down, but it'd be pretty cool to see those back again. So there's not a lot of changes that has to happen. Like, we can have the current tax code as it is, just rewrite the system so that it actually benefits everyone across the board. And then the reason why I was using a 75% is that, okay, if you have anything above $100,000, so let's say I have $600,000 in the bank. You are allowed, okay, here, perfect. Here's the solution. You are allowed to have your yearly amounts of income saving in your bank account. That is your upper limit. So if you make 55,000 a year, you can keep up to 55,000 a year in your bank account. Anything above the $55,000 a year has to be used in some sort of capacity. That's it, right? So what that basically means is either you spend your money You save your money, you put it into an investment account, put it into a savings account or something, or yeah, you put in a savings account, um, or you spend it. You save it, you spend it, or you give it, right? You basically want to incentivize using your money instead of just letting it sit there, and then you forget about it, and then you end up using it the wrong way. Um, then uh So then, and then the cool part about that is, let's say you work two jobs, right? So if you work two jobs, you shouldn't be taxed for working two jobs. Now, what you should be taxed for if you're not using the money for those two jobs to take care of yourself, to pay for your bills, and all sorts of things. So basically, as long as you live within your means, which is within your income allowance, then by that all means you should not be taxed. After you, let's say you make a product, you sell it, you use your money, the money that you're working, that you save, and you invest it into yourself to create something, and then you sell it and you make a profit. Once you start making profit and you start making income beyond that, which is the startings of a business, right? All of that money should be invested back into your business, and you should have receipts to prove that you're actually using it. And it's not like every single sale transaction receipt. It's more like the overall receipts that fund, like, let's say for example, I create an item, and then I create prototypes for the next item, right? If I show receipts with proof of development, right? And it's not a complicated proof of research and development with financial transactions, then I will get a break from the tax. And it's like, okay, cool, we won't tax you percentage because you're actually using your money to fund things. And then whatever excess, and then again, because you have that limit that's based off of the amount of money that you spend working, what ends up happening is now you're incentivized to use that extra money to actually think. So now what you can do is you now, if you don't make any research or development in your system, guess what? That makes any real profit. Guess what? Now you have to give your employees higher bonuses, or else you'll get taxed. So that's the genius level behind it. It's right. So your income earnings should not be taxed, right? Or your liquid assets should not be taxed. Well, I'm sorry. I said it wrong. Whatever you earn, you should not you anything you earn beyond your hourly rate, your hourly limits. So if you get paid $15 an hour, you should be paid $15 an hour. That's it. Like that's it. And then if the business is making enough profit, the business should not the bit I my personal opinion is this: if you are working for a company, the company should be and the company is making a lot of profit, the company's profits should be paying for the employees' coverage of health insurance, work insurance, stuff like that. Then, with the money that you make from work that protects you while you're at work, if you want to have that sort of protection for yourself, you should be able to pay for that separately. And then once you're able to form your own company, and let's see your own side business, and you become your own thing, then you won't need that company anymore because now you're self-sufficient. And then you can do the same thing once you become profitable and pay your employees the same way. So I think that's how the system should work. It shouldn't be predatory, right? Like if I'm supposed to make $15 an hour, which by the way I don't make $15, I make much more. Um, but let's say if I'm making $15 an hour, I should be being paid $15 an hour regardless of where I work, right? Like if I say $15 an hour, it should be $15 an hour. So the company needs to be profitable enough to support protecting the workers with the required insurances, things like that. And that means we may have to take a look into how insurances work, because I am of the opinion that insurances should work as more of an investment strategy that rewards you for paying into the protections for your car, and it should function as an investment, so that, let's say for example, you decide to sell the car. If you paid insurance towards that car, you should get a percentage of that, what you paid back. You should have some sort of rate of return on that, because the car in itself is a depreciating asset. And if you are rewarded for good behavior with taking care of your car and making the car last a really long time, and you pay into that with all that insurance, then by the time you either retire the car, or let's say the car gets if you retire the car and sell the car to someone, you should get a percentage of the money that you should get a portion of the money that you've invested into the car throughout the years, the insurance back, because otherwise it's just a sinking fund, and that doesn't make any sense from an insurance standpoint. So I think insurance should work as investment strategies. So that's my theory. So like I so okay, all right. So I'll end it here. This is my theory. But for taxes, this is my discussion on taxes. Here's what we do. Everyone who works gets to get, instead of replace liquid and replace income tax with liquid asset tax, and set the liquid asset tax to replace all the taxes, like every tax that has to do with income, that has to relate with the income, with liquid asset tax, and let the tax be um based on the individual making more than how much it, holding holding a liquid asset amount, like of their bank accounts, of all their bank and checking accounts, of all the money that they have. Like seriously, like think about it. So that's how you that's I feel like that's the first step in progress. And if you take a look at different systems and explore different ways of analyzing the system, I feel like that could be the first step to actually seeing a positive future in humanity, and also in America, and also set a model that I think will be beneficial and respects. And the cool part is it respects all cultures, because all it is incentivizing good behavior. And you let culture and religion decide the moralistic and conceptual values of that. But I think from a systematic standpoint, if we can kind of get a line of how to achieve progress that way, I think we could see some really cool things happening. So I'm optimistic for the future. What do you guys think?